Hello and welcome to Christy Lee TV. Doing another podcast today, coming at you live, doing a topic that I haven't really gotten into too much. We're doing men versus women. Well, not really. We're trying to get beyond that actually. But I have an exciting guest. His name's Jerry Slayden. He is a NASM certified personal trainer, a Division I college athlete, first team All-American, 7-year pro ball player in the Phillies organization, where he was a 3-time All-Star. We're going to be learning so much more about Jeremy Slayden, but his message is essentially that feminism is ruining America, it's ruining families, and we need to bring masculinity back. So I'm going to welcome in Jeremy Slayden. Welcome in. Hello. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Christy. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
You bet. I thought that this would be interesting because it's interesting to interview a male about how important masculinity is. And I think that some women get threatened by this whole subject, like, no, we can do it. We don't need men. I mean, this is the message that society gives you. And I
Right.
can admit that I have fallen victim to. I went through a very painful, difficult divorce. Never thought I would have to go through something like that. And it was a struggle being a single mom for a few years, even with their dad. He was present in their lives, thank goodness. But even so, just when two parents are not present in the home, it just makes it more difficult. It just does. But I think that during that time, because I dealt with the mom guilt and everything, I enjoyed hearing the, like, you can do it all. You're doing it all. Like, look at you go. you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we have so much to talk about, just how this is affecting that messaging and also there's just a million different directions we're going to go in. So,
Sure.
first tell me how you got on this subject.
Yeah. I actually came onto it sort of by accident. I mean, we all know that there's a huge component of women out there that are promoting this toxic masculinity message, which is a part of the feminist movement. Okay. But I have always been more geared toward, I want to empower men. I want them to refine their courage in the battle for our faith, freedom, and future, for our children, especially. So that's been my main thing. And my way of going about that was create a community of guys that are on the same page for the most part with their faith and with their beliefs about America, their patriotism, and let's get in shape together. Let's have a competition where we make it fun. And, let's talk about issues that are holding men back and how to overcome that. Well, through the process of researching how to become a better coach in that environment, I started to find these studies. So it's not just Jeremy saying it. It's not that I'm a man. I'm looking at the actual science that's coming out that's befuddling the mainstream media, by the way, where they're looking at the same women that they started polling back in the 1970s when the feminist movement began to have great control in this country and began to succeed on their agendas. So these mainstream publications like The Guardian and others are looking at the data saying, oh my gosh, the polls are showing internationally, not just in America, that women, liberal women who went down that road of feminist empowerment, whatever that looks like, they are saying that they're less happy than they were then, and they're far less happy than their conservative female counterparts. How interesting, right? And what's really fun, Christy, is if you do some Google searches on that, you'll find articles where they're trying to figure it out, and they're coming up with the most silly ideas. Like, well, maybe it's because now they have long commutes. Back in the 70s, they didn't have to commute as far, but now they're commuting. That's straight out of The Guardian. So it's insane what they come up with, when the truth is it's right in front of their face. They just don't want to acknowledge it, like many other agendas that are promoted in society right now. The truth is slapping them in the face, and the truth is their greatest enemy. So they're doing everything they can to distract the public.
Just from a personal experience, I think that just as an anecdotal, we always have to say that, message, can agree with that obviously I'm much happier being married. I mean, God's grace, through his grace, I found someone that shared the Christian values as much as I do. And having him in the home to help with everything it's just such a sigh of relief. Of course, I mean, obviously people get stressed out, but it's a different kind of stress than when I was trying to juggle everything as a working single mother. And I think that it's like a vicious cycle of unhappiness, because society's telling you that you're a strong, independent woman, but there's so many cases where you don't feel that way because God intended for us to have a helper. And so when you don't, it's a vicious cycle because then you're like, I'm supposed to be feeling strong and independent, but I feel like I'm failing, and I
Mhm.
feel guilty that my kids are even in this situation, even if it wasn't any one person's fault, or so yeah, I mean, on anecdotally, because we
Yeah.
always have to include that when we're talking about studies, I can attest to those feelings of definitely happier having a partner.
Yeah. And, I'm hearing that more and more from really strong, talented women like yourself that could easily, I mean, the thing is, you didn't stop doing a podcast. You're still in the news. You're still doing things. So it's not like having a family. And do you have kids as well?
3.
Yeah. Great. So, I mean, you're able to do both. Now, can you go as high? I don't know. Being, as you could if you were single without the responsibilities of home life. Possibly not, because you are trying to balance a few more things. But I think the key word here, and you used the word, was satisfaction. It's not all about temporal joy not joy is the wrong word too. Temporal happiness or gratification that can come and go as easily as you can get fired, or you could have an injury or something that takes you out. But being able to raise kids and pour into the life of, these little humans that you've created, that God has placed you as their caretaker, their nurturer, their keeper. That is such a fulfilling role. It's a satisfying role. And interestingly enough, that is the word that these studies use. They went to these women, they said, are you overall satisfied with your life? They didn't just say happiness. So I think that's what we have to look at is, are we after true long-term satisfaction, or are we after temporary gratification where we've got to stay on top in order to keep that gratification going at all times? Because that's where the world is trying to tell everybody to go, is just stay gratified.
Speaking of what the world tries to tell you, you have people like Harry Styles wearing dresses and
Yep.
acting extremely feminine. Do you think that agenda? Do you think that that's working? I mean, do other men look at Harry Styles and we're like, man, I wish I could be more like that guy?
I think human beings, if we've learned anything in the last 2 to 3 years, it is how easily we can become deceived. Even things that you never, I mean, my alma mater, Georgia Tech, they hosted the dude that was swimming against these NCAA lifelong female swimmers and trying to say that he won. And that's my college that I played baseball at. So I'm just amazed at the levels at which we are able to be deceived. So do they think it's cool at first blush? Probably not. I'm talking about guys seeing Harry Styles in a dress. Probably not, but with enough messaging. And it is an agenda. This is an agenda that goes back to the beginning of time, by the way, but in a big way with cultural Marxism, the 100-year march through history and through our institutions. They want the breakdown of the family. They want a blurring of gender lines. You can read what was written into the congressional record, the 45 Goals of Communism in 1963, straight up said, we want to break down the family. We want the nuclear family. We want to blur the gender roles. We want to remove the mother from the home. All of those things are taking place now, and people are less happy because of it. And yeah, the Harry Styles thing, you may just think, oh, he's going through a phase, whatever. It's part of an agenda. And I think to deny that, you probably just haven't done your history research.
So let's dig into that a little bit more. One of the things that I became frustrated with when it came to traditional journalism, having been in that field for so long, was I was very proud of the tenets of journalism. And one of those tenets was to examine motivations, examine why things are happening, particularly the motivations. So, how do we dig into that? Like, what are the motivations for this push to empower women
Yeah.
to be single and to essentially degrade men and paint masculinity as a bad word?
Yeah. Well, there's two things that immediately come to mind. Number one, a totalitarian takeover, whether we're talking about in a nation or across the globe, that can only happen when the strong men of society are emasculated, weakened, marginalized. If you and almost every dictator has always tried to take out the intellectual men and the men in the prime of life. They either threw them in the gulags or they killed them, because that was the biggest bulwark against those totalitarian takeovers. So that's one, just like, really clear example. There was another one that came to mind too on why. Oh, this is a big one. Depopulation. We're having lower birth rates than ever before. There's less marriage than there's been in America since, I believe, 1970. Again, we're at like the lowest marriage rate in history. I think they want us having less kids. Any depopulationist has always believed that the fewer people you have to control, the easier they are to control. And I think the Georgia Guidestones were blown up for a reason, and I don't think it was a patriot that did it, if I had to guess. I think it was giving away the game when it talked about we need to decrease the human population down to, I think it was 500 million, somewhere in there. And I think that now that we're seeing these things happen through COVID, through vaccines, through all these different things that are happening at the same time, men's sperm counts are half of what they were 50 years ago. There's all these, you can say, okay, all this is an accident. All this is just happening at the same time. That's so naive. That's so naive. Then you've got the Georgia Guidestones, which basically laid that out in stone since 1980.
Literally in stone.
Yeah. And so they had to blow it up because it's like, it's giving away too much. So yeah, I think depopulation is one, and taking out the strong men, that's going to take out the nuclear family. We see what's happened in the Black community in America with fathers not being involved. Highest crime rates we have in this country. You hate to say it, but it is in the Black community. Lowest education.
And stop. Let's pause there for a moment, because how many people do you think realize that women, particularly Black women, are incentivized to be single, to the point that if they do have a man in the home, they don't get their paycheck.
That's right.
I mean, I wonder how many people actually really know that.
If I had to guess, I would say 30%. I would say 30%, because I think you've got a lot more conservatives and common sense thinkers out there that are on our team than the media, who has all the, the bullhorns of progressive leftism. They make us feel like we're isolated and that we're, kind of a fringe group. But I think there's a lot of people that know what's going on. They just don't have the megaphones to say it. But so if the country split in half in terms of progressive versus traditional, I think out of the traditional group, you've got a pretty solid group of people that know that is exactly what the Democrat agenda has been, is to control, that people group. And they've done a fantastic, I think the voting percentage for the Democrat Party is like somewhere between 90 and 95% from the Black community, which it's the very thing holding them back, are those policies. So it's sad, but it's a cycle. And I think that they're using it as a model. They would love to do that to all people groups.
And then also, we see this push in the media and even humor. Pretty much in every movie, the father or the male figure is portrayed as dumb. Yeah. And then the hero woman, smart, intelligent, comes swooping in.
Almost every time. Yeah. That was really going on. I noticed it as a little kid in the late 90s. I was thinking, because my dad was a strong dad. He was a leader in the community. He was a guy that taught me to overcome my fears and to not ever be a victim, but be a victor. Like, learn how to turn the tough stuff in your life into a stepping stone, just like always be working to improve. And then I would turn on the TV and I'd, from Married with Children to, there's so many from back then. Paralysis by analysis or whatever.
Family Matters.
Yeah, almost all of them did it, like the father was some kind of buffoon that the woman was always having to take care of and, reroute his course, which is sad. But I think it's gone a step beyond that today, where in this metaverse they're wanting to bring us into, they really want to have us living in this alternate reality. And if you look at a lot of the superhero movies, especially geared toward young kids, you see women beating up men all the time, not just in like superhero films, but also like regular, like kind of realistic. You see that all the time, and it's not real. You also see more of like, we're not even only going to make men stupid, we're going to make them women. So like you mentioned about Harry Styles, you've got Brad Pitt in a dress. Not too long ago, he did a photo shoot like that. There's more and more of this push. If you get on Instagram, you're going to see all of these. If they're not fully transgender, they're at least dudes wearing makeup and thinking that it's cool. There's just more and more of that. I think that's the new push. But the good news is it's so far over the line that I think your moderate Republican, or your really nice Christian that wants to believe, well, the truth's got to be somewhere in the middle, right? And I'm kind of a social justice progressive, but I'm also anti-abortion. Just those middle of the road people. I think it's kind of waking them up.
The other thing that I think gets confusing is you have these agendas which have similar motivations, but then they end up, because there is such a thing as absolute truth. Sorry to break anybody's bubble, but there is. You have this point where these agendas actually end up clashing.
Yes.
And making everything implode. For example, while we've had for many years, and we've talked about many years of this putting men down, demonizing masculinity, and raising women up, supposedly. At the same time, we're in this huge wave of these same people saying gender doesn't exist. There's no such thing as man or woman. Men can get pregnant. So right there, it's like these two agendas seem to contradict each other, because how can we talk about how stupid men are and how masculinity is so toxic if, wait a minute, but there's actually no genders. This is like, how do I keep up with this?
Yeah, no, you don't. That's the point. I think anybody with a lick of common sense at this point has to either be like, what, you're making fun of it. They need to either just make fun of it and move on, but definitely don't listen. I mean, it's just the agendas are so far gone. I mean, look at this photo. This happened to me on my phone when you were saying that.
Yeah.
So you've got an obese, mentally ill male that just won a Miss America beauty pageant, right? I miss the days of the old America when, an obese man might watch the Miss America pageant, not win, not win. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure those girls work hard to possibly win that award. And now that's taken away. We see it in sports. We're seeing it in STEM education and in colleges where they're putting quotas, and that goes for, women versus men. It goes for different races, but what they always do is they lower the standard. I mean, if you talk about people going into the medical field or into the construction industry, architecture, do you really want to rely on quotas? And people will die for that reason. I think in the medical community, we're already seeing people that are completely inept, not qualified to be there. And this is not a knock on men or women in this case. But I'm just saying that there's a lowering of the standard that's happening across the board for the reasons that you're discussing. And yes, it's, they're cannibalizing their own agenda.
We saw the narratives fall apart in real time, because we saw the Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and them asking her, what is a woman? And she's like, I don't know, basically. And
I'm not a biologist.
And then weeks later, you have Hillary Clinton, or when the Dobbs situation happened, you have her saying, we need to stand for all women. And like these same people just a few weeks ago were saying saying anything or saying anybody was a woman is insulting and they're not biologists. So it's like in real time, their narrative is falling apart.
It's unreal. And it's just so funny that, how do you say her name? Ketanji Jackson Brown. Is that it?
Ketanji, I don't know offhand. Sorry. Ketanji Brown Jackson. Ketanji Jackson Brown, one of those.
Yeah, I think the audience knows who we're getting at.
I don't know. I'm not a English major.
There you go.
I don't remember her name.
But the fact is, of all things, for her she's a judge, and she can't judge what's a man and a woman. How are you going to judge like complex U.S. law? It's an impossibility. It's dangerous to society, and it comes back to something you said earlier: absolute truth. The people on that side are able to be like a reed swayed by the wind. Whatever their person in leadership says is right, that's what they believe is true, until they say the next thing, which may be completely a contradiction, because they don't have a God that transcends, what we think, our own brains. That is the the harbinger of absolute truth. I think we have that. So no matter what people can say who are in power, we can go back to, okay, is this logically sound? And is this true beyond just like making me feel good? And I think that that's what the other side has done really well, is tapped into emotions being, it's just so funny.
Yeah, I mean,
What
everything's more feelings oriented. And I mean, this could be a whole separate you could have a whole separate podcast just on the concept of absolute truth and
Mhm.
why these people hate it. I mean, because I love writing and I love journalism, I love that words have meanings, that there are absolute definitions for the meanings of words. I like to examine what people say and their intention of when they said it. And these are a group of people that value perception over intention. And why do they value perception? Because perception can be fluid.
Mm.
Intention is what a person truly meant. And we should be examining that over how something is received. It's such a mess.
Yeah, it makes great sense. And, I'll say that from a Christian perspective, we talk about feelings being what they're really after, and how the political left right now in America judges everything based on feelings. Whereas the Bible says basically the opposite. It says, the human heart is deceptive above all things.
Mhm.
So guard your heart. It's just, that's why I think that this agenda goes back to the beginning of time, to the enemy who wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And
Yes.
he does that through taking a truth, flipping it on its head, perverting it, changing the language around it, and confusing people. And God is not the author of confusion, but he is.
Yeah. You have said that the feminist movement has made promises it can't keep. What did you mean by that?
Well, the number one thing is, as we were both describing it early on, we were using that word empowerment. They promise to empower, empower, empower. They promise satisfaction. So the big one is the whole, title of this interview, or maybe it's not the title of this particular one, but that feminism would empower women. That's the number one. And perhaps, especially early on, like first wave feminism, giving women the right to vote, that kind of thing. That's great. That's great. But I think that it got commandeered by second and third wave feminism, which had a very different agenda. I mean, is it empowering to abort a baby? Is it empowering to abort a baby that's born alive and it's laying on a table in the other room, and the doctor says, you know what, we can just let it die? And California law right now says if anyone investigates that, they will come under criminal
So
charges.
crazy.
So if that's feminism and that's empowerment, I don't want any part of it, because truly what that's doing is taking away the dignity of life and our valuation of life. And the next step to that is going to be, what's it called when you can legally kill yourself in a hospital? I can't think of the
Oh,
word.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the legal word as well. I mean, basically consent to euthanasia, essentially.
Euthanasia. Yeah. And in Canada is kind of like California. Whatever happens in Canada, that's what they're going to try to push next. Same with California. I know that in Canada and in certain European countries right now, the euthanasia movement is big. It's like, if you go in and you tell them that you're in pain and unhappy, they'll encourage you to kill yourself. I mean, I've
They'll
seen
encourage you
news.
to kill yourself if you're poor.
It's
That's like one of the latest reasons. I was watching a heartbreaking story of a man that was having a very bad back pain, and he was finding it more and more difficult to afford, like, live on the government, essentially, which is what he had been doing, and was about to be threatened by homelessness. And so he was in the final stages of figuring out how to do the government assisted
yeah,
euthanasia. And
yeah.
and then in the interview, he's like, I really don't want to die. He's like, but I'd probably die shortly after becoming homeless anyway. So
Mm,
it's
yeah.
insane.
It's heartbreaking. I just feel like a lot of this is going to continue to point people back to scriptural truths, the word of God, because everything they're doing on that side is flying in the face of what the Bible calls Christ followers to do. So we're supposed to care for people who are infirm, who are hurt, who are, struggling with money and poverty, what have you. And that is always, I mean, even in Hitler's Germany, the church was trying to take care of those people, where Hitler was creating hospitals to kill them, right? So even though they wrap it up in much friendlier language these days, and it seems, I don't know, cleaner, it's the same thing repackaged for modern day, and it's happening again. So I think there's a great divide happening with people who don't know God and people that do.
So we've kind of narrowed in on the motivation being kind of this Marxist attitude and this drive for totalitarianism. People are easier to control if you isolate them, if you break families apart, if you make them alone and reliant on a government. But why is it that there's so many people that buy into this idea that traditional gender roles in a marriage or in a family is toxic in some way or outrageous?
It's a hard, I mean, sometimes it's tough to wrap your head around that because there's so much evidence, like thousands and thousands of years of evidence that is in favor of a fulfilling life coming from family, raising kids, a quality marriage, all of those things that have been, beacons of strong societies. So that's a little tough, but I think it's all about the idea of service to others versus serving yourself. And that is something that, again, from a Christian perspective, I think the Bible is calling us into a life of service. If I'm the head of my household, well, I want to serve my wife. I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good father. That takes work. It takes effort. And it doesn't always feel good to me because I may be tired at the end of the day when my little boys want to wrestle in the floor. But guess what? I'm going to wrestle in the floor with them because I'm never going to get this time back. Right. And in serving them, I'm gaining fulfillment. I'm gaining memories that one day on my deathbed, like I'm not going to regret any of that. But guess what? If I work an extra couple hours a night, and I spend less time with them, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with working hard and pursuing your career, but if that's what life becomes, I've met many, many men, both in sports careers who made it to the highest levels, and many men who have made it in corporate America in sales. I mean, multimillionaires that are miserable people. They're unhappy people. Their kids don't talk to them. So I think it's that carrot of short-term gratification that's held out, saying, if you just do this, you'll feel really good. But the long term is a loss of a lot of things in life that we were meant to experience. And I think that's why women now who are in their 50s, 60s are, and maybe they're not so gung-ho about the feminist agendas anymore, are coming around and saying either A, I missed the boat, or B, like, gosh, I want to go spend more time with my kids who I haven't talked to in a long time. You're seeing that happen more often.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess my message to women is don't buy into this lie anymore. Sure, it feels good if you feel like you're failing as a single mom, been there, it's hard. And sure, it feels good to have society tell you, like, look at you, you're doing it all, you can handle it all. But, don't buy into the lie. It's destructive. And it's not God's best for your life. And if nothing else, obviously you can't magically find a partner, but if nothing else, you can embrace that that God is the father of that family, and look for other male influences for your children, because all of that's important. So I mean, that would be my message to women, but what would your message be to men to resolve this societal problem?
Yeah, well, part of the problem is our fault because we believed the messaging of toxic masculinity. It's been thrust on us through entertainment, the things that are not spoken, like we talked about earlier, but they're shown. Little boys, you can't hardly walk through the children's section of a bookstore and find little boys on the covers of children's books where they're the hero. You can't find it hardly. So we have to realize that. So we've got to take care of our kids and the messaging they're getting. But in terms of ourselves, step back into godly masculinity, be a good caretaker, provider, because you'll become more attractive to women. I think number one, and I think many of these women that are disenchanted right now with that movement and they're looking for something more, they're going to look for a man. And I think being a strong man with the ability to go out and get it done in this world is a big part of resolving the whole issue, for lack of a better way to say it. So that's where my warrior program comes in. So I created something called Warrior Mind, Body, and Soul. You can find it at warriormbs.com. It's only for men. It's a like-minded group of guys who are Christians. They're patriots. And they know they need to level up. They know that there's something holding them back in their life. Either mentally, they're not there. So that's the mind part. And we got to get our head clear and get rid of the brain fog. Two is the physical fitness. I think physical fitness drives mental clarity, and it also sharpens you in many ways beyond just the physical. But hey, everybody wants to lose a little weight. So that's a good aspect to it. And then lastly, the spiritual grounding. There's things that we have in that program that are challenges to get guys out of the box, and to connect with their family, their brothers in the whole thing, and then God as well. And those three things, mind, body, and soul, they work in tandem. They support each other. So if you want to join a community to level up in one of those areas, you go to warriormbs.com and you can have a conversation with me and we can get you enrolled.
Now, I mean, a lot of men have been beaten down by society. I can't tell you how many times men are like, actually now, like, was that okay? Or like, if they give a compliment, is that fine?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, of course it is. But it's like men are like scared now to even give compliments. It's crazy. But yeah, men are beaten down, and then maybe hearing from you, and thinking like, well, he's an All-American pro ball player history, 3-time All-Star. I mean, easy for him to say. I don't know if I can really embrace this, but I wondered if you wanted to share a little bit about, you've had your weaknesses even as a strong masculine man, right? You're a recovering addict. Can you tell me what led to that and how you were able to move beyond that and have
Yeah.
these motivations?
Sure can. And thank you for asking that question. So you mentioned, all the things you would put in a bio, right? That sound really good. Well, at the end of my baseball career, I was in a lot of pain. I lost my career in a moment, right at the cusp of the big leagues. And I found myself alone, out of money, in great physical pain for many years. I got hired for a pretty high level sales job that I didn't know how to do and didn't have the emotional energy to handle it. And I found myself addicted. I found myself addicted to sexual acting out. I found myself addicted to chemicals in the morning to get me up, and then alcohol at the end of the day to help me slowly come off of it. And then darkening the doors of places that, had you told me 10 years prior that this is the kind of stuff I would be acting out, with, it would have brought me to tears. I would have thought, I'll never engage in that kind of stuff. But I was doing it because I was hurting and I wasn't being honest. I'd become a dishonest person. So was I a masculine man? Absolutely not. I was a guy who was living in a prison of addiction, making good money and holding that money up in front of the world saying, okay, don't ask any more questions because I'm doing well financially. And I think a lot of guys are doing that. They look around at the world, and I'm not saying everybody's addicted to something, but what I am saying is they see all that's going on out there in the world, all these problems, and it's kind of a little bit overwhelming. And these are good men, but they've retreated and they just hold up their career success or something else to block the world from seeing any deeper. My way out of recovery was by getting really honest with myself first, then some other trusted people, and eventually my wife. And by getting honest with her, telling her the truth, eyeball to eyeball, we had a process we had to work through. And it was tough. I mean, for 6 months, really tough, but there was also a burden that lifted. All of a sudden God began to infuse our relationship with life. And today it is so much better than it was back, 5-6 years ago. So God has done an amazing work in my life, but the principles that applied to my personal recovery, they are the principles that apply to our society. And guess what? It's going to be tough to tell the truth about what's going on in our culture. We do it every day, but to get society to acknowledge, yes, this is a problem, for the Black community to come out and say, yes, we are voting ourselves onto this progressive plantation and we have to stop. That is going to be hard to make that adjustment. It's possible, but it's going to be tough. But the beauty of it all is there's hope. There's hope. So in that Warrior program, we do I'm very open about my story, even more open than I am here. Because I feel like that gives other guys permission to get open about their story. And that's where that community begins to be created. And I'm not saying that program in 60 days resolves everybody's issues, because it doesn't, but it gives them a new, fresh starting point. And one of my jobs as a coach is to help them find their lane, whether it's into recovery in some way, or if it's into how they can best fight for freedom and our future. Because a lot of guys, generally they have good values maybe, or they're conservative or Christian, but they really don't even know where to start in terms of that fight that's going on out there. and God's given me some great experiences to learn, and I'm able to help kind of them maybe find their lane in that fight.
You mentioned again the Black community and some of the messaging that comes out. It does just sound so good. So, like the Black Lives Matter movement had released a statement saying, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable." Obviously, the first part of that is saying we disrupt, so that
Yeah.
doesn't sound good. But the part that is invoking the it takes a village. That
Right. Yeah.
part we're all familiar with that saying, and it sounds good. What's the problem with that?
Well, the problem is the source of it. Where are they getting that ideology? And I believe it's Patrice Cullors and Alicia Garza are two of the three um, very feminist uh, females that I think they're lesbian as well. But they have said straight up on videotape, you can find it anywhere, like, we are trained Marxists. We're trained Marxists. So if they're trained Marxists, there was another word in that little BLM quote that you didn't stop at, and that's collectivism.
That collectively care for one another.
Collectively care for one another, right? So I don't even think that statement, that entire statement was honest. I think it goes much deeper than that, to an actual Marxist philosophy, and we're seeing that play out in schools right now, as educators think that they should truly be more important than people's parents, kids' parents, in terms of educating their kids. And I truly believe that is where they're going, is because Marxism, they worship the state. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the state, because there is no God. So we have to create our own, utopia here on the earth, and the state is the vehicle to do that. So that's the problem. Is they're not actually being honest with that statement, but it does have enough pointers showing what they really believe. And where is Marxism really worked? Because that's the next question. Well, maybe Marxism works really well somewhere. Where is it working well?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that. Before I move on to this next question and wrap things up, I did want to acknowledge that the messaging is so consistent. They come up with these phrases and they push it out, push it out, push it out until we obviously accept it. And their whole embracing of abortion and that probably did play a factor in the results of the election, but they constantly repeat, "Oh, government should not be involved in women's health care, and this is about women's health," and they push that out. But what's missing from that, and I want to make sure everybody knows, is there are multiple studies that are what's being ignored is multiple studies that talk about women's mental health. Women's mental health after getting an abortion suffers a great deal, according to multiple studies. More likely to drink, more likely to be suicidal, more likely to be depressed. And that's never talked about, is the implications that, yes, this doesn't just affect what we accept as another human life, but this actually affects the life of the mother and a disruption to the mother's health. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I've always assumed that was the case. I've not read the specific studies and surveys that you're referring to. I do know one fact is women are on double the antidepressants in America right now as men. So, that all obviously has implications. So I think you're right. I think the majority of these agendas and these pushes are unhealthy, if not all of them. So yeah, I mean, we ignore those things at our peril. And I got to tell you, we got to throw in something about, I mean, Carrie Lake's a woman, right? And it's just insanity to me. And I'm sorry I'm going in this direction, but it's insanity to me where we're at, that her opponent could not even have to debate her, and could also be the Secretary of State, controlling that election, the quality control of the election, in terms of the printers and in terms of the machines.
Is she gonna certify her own win? I mean,
I think she has to, right? Yeah, it's absolutely insane. But I think therein it could lie the seeds to recovery, because if enough people wake up, and I hope it wakes them up. I mean, the more brazen that side gets, I hope the more people in the middle are like, oh my God, maybe the 2020 election was stolen too. I hope there's more people that kind of start putting it together.
Well, on that note, I'm glad that you said that because again, I know that we need to wrap up, but I wanted to hit this on the topic of masculinity and also on the topic of women that are bullheaded, um, like myself. So uh, this is the problem that I have. So I for a long time identified and registered as an independent, and so taking a step back from it, and in my years of journalism, always trying to take a step back and be obviously as impartial as could be. I
Mhm.
do see that you have both sides feeding us these narratives. And the frustration I have right now is that it's like I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. That because we're seeing this happen again, because we're seeing all of this malfeasance happen and then gaslit like crazy, like we can't even trust our own eyes. Um, it's at the point where you would feel like the more masculine thing to do is like finally do something about it. And I got to
Yes.
admit that it's hard not to feel that way. Like nothing changed from 2020 to 2022. Actually, it seems like they refined their method, and nothing was done. And then they're still on both sides, Republicans as well, still saying like, "Oh, but we have to be, we just have to accept and we have to be peaceful and we'll figure it out or we'll come up with different strategies." And to me, I gotta believe that other people are just like, screw that.
Oh,
Like that
I,
didn't work.
I'm 100% there. Yeah, the whole message of we got to vote harder. Just vote harder next time, right? It's like, no, there was a red wave. There's no doubt in my mind that there was a red wave across this country, and they were able to turn it into a red puddle. And anywhere that they really wanted, like Arizona, Lauren Boebert's area, Pennsylvania, those places that were kind of the heads of the snake, they had to have those, and they got those, right? And I don't know the answer, Christy. We are at a point where I don't know, other than the military having, and I talked to General Flynn about this, half of our military generals are not woke and they don't agree with this, but they're just playing along to keep their job. The other half are, General Milley and guys like him, they're true believe they're woke as can be. And that's a real problem, because a lot of people are like, well, the military can step in and change things and Trump will come back. I don't really think that's going to happen. And I am one, I'll throw this out there right now. First time I've said it online. I am one that would be not attracted because I want to do it, but prepared for an armed revolution to take back the country. However, the moment we did that, we would have North Korea on our shores. We would have so many other countries that want a piece of that action to break this country apart. It would not be a North versus South or a right versus left. It would be far bigger than that. So my momentary answer is we need mass noncompliance for all the people that suspect that what we already know to be true. To win them over, I think if you have mass noncompliance, it is going to take a lot of fortitude and a lot of courage from men and women. But I think the reason the COVID agenda in America was able to last as long as it did is, even though they didn't get the compliance they wanted, I think what was the percentage of Americans that did get the shot? It was like 70% eventually,
Yeah, that
right?
sounds right.
And I think they wanted like 95. I think
Oh
that
yeah.
was kind of their goal, right? They
Mhm.
knew they wouldn't get, they thought there's some crazies that won't do it, but we'll get to 95. Well, they got 70. Imagine if they would have only gotten 30%.
Yeah.
The whole thing would have been in the tank within 5 months, bottom line. So, and we see it in certain companies, Southwest, when they said like, we're no longer going to do the mask thing, forget it. I think it was masks. They their corporate brass finally bowed down and said, okay, like we're going to stop the mask mandate. So it can happen, but it's got to take a critical mass of people to say, we're just not going to comply with our government's, edicts and mandates. And I'm not saying we need to start breaking laws, but our country's being subverted in a big way.
We're gaslit half the time to believe something's a law when it's not even a law.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was reflecting about this too, because we've heard for especially the past 2 years about this silent majority. And I was reflecting on that and I'm like, does that like even exist? And you feel like it's the majority of the people that feel the way that we do. I was trying to like think about this, and all I can figure is that most people do have the same common sense ideas and logic, but there's such a large percentage of people that can be so easily manipulated, or they're so disengaged that they'll just, like, if someone brings them a ballot and asks if they can pre-fill it out for them, sure,
Yeah.
whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I was trying to figure out how these things happen. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think that they can do that enough to win an election. I mean, if I truly, I think it's 60-40. I think you've got 60% of the American people, even if they're not Christian, they're probably from a values perspective, going to basically land where we are. But it's the overpowering media messaging it's just incredible, the kind of power that they have. And I do know there's a conservative, side of media and alternate media and all that, but it doesn't have the collective force and the ability to like lock arms with each other to have, because it's not just the American media.
And it doesn't necessarily have the funding. I mean, we don't have an FTX. We
Yeah,
don't have money that we're giving away and having sent back to us from the Ukraine. That's a whole nother topic, but
yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of forget your original question, but I think we are in the majority. I think it's very important for us to not become isolated though, in thinking that we're not. And that's why these communities are so important, cause I could watch your show, Christy, like every day and gain some hope from it. Okay. There's a voice and she's got guests that believe like I do. That feels good, but nothing is a substitute for eyeball to eyeball human contact. And I think that's why going and meeting new friends that believe like you do, spending time with them, going to events. I mean, going to like a Marifest or even a Clay Clark event or whatever, you're going to feel that energy. It's like, okay, like there's a lot of people that believe like I do, and they're not crazy and we're not crazy. It's very, that is truly empowering, going to those kind of things. So I think we have to stay in community, and we've got to do a better job of us deciding when we're going to lock arms and not comply.
Absolutely. Well, I think that we covered a lot of ground. And again, to my listeners, this has always been my motivation coming out of traditional journalism, is to be a voice for the voiceless. People like Jeremy Slayden, we don't hear from often enough. We only hear one side of the argument when it comes to men versus women. Feminism is great. So these are the topics that I do want to focus on in an effort to bring balance. Because, sometimes I get that criticism like, oh, I thought you left to bring balance. I am. It's heavily overweighted
You
in
got it.
mainstream media one way. And so I actually have to overcompensate and cover these topics that mainstream media won't, to bring balance back to the table. So my motivation and my goals and my tenets of journalism are the same in that respect. But is there any final words that you wanted to leave us with, and also remind us of how we can stay connected?
Yeah, I think the final point I made about community, that's the main thing. Find community. And if you feel far from God, or if something spoke to you today about my own story of personal recovery, find a trusted friend, advisor, counselor. Be careful about the counselors, by the way, but find someone that you can begin to get honest with, because honesty is the beginning of the road to recovery. And it's also the beginning of the road to recovery for our nation. So I think that really matters. And you need community and friendships. And also, Christy, thank you for what you're doing. I know you could have stayed the course, and I don't know much about your history, but from what you've said, you could have stayed on that track and probably done really, really well and been applauded by the mainstream and all this stuff. But you've chosen to be a voice for
And I
truth.
would have been a lot richer.
Yeah. So there,
Many people don't realize that in these efforts, like, I cut my salary in half, and
yeah.
that's why it is a struggle. And because you'll get those naysayers saying like, oh, you did this for no notoriety or money. It's like, what money? Like, I don't
That's
have corporate advertisers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's
Um,
ridiculous on its face, but thank you for what you're doing. And if you guys want to check out my program for men, warriormbs.com. And I've had so many women say, do you have a program for women? I sure wish I did. I got to find a good female coach. But so that may come down the road. But if you're a guy, you're a conservative, you're patriot, check out warriormbs.com.
and you said it's like a 60-day program, and it's just to what should motivate someone to do something like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a simple one would be, hey, through the holidays this year, I don't want to gain 10 more pounds. I want to
Gotcha.
lose 10 pounds and feel awesome going to 2023. And I say, great, we'll get you there. And along that way, there'll be some other things, but it could be any number of things. Several guys in their mid 20s, this may interest you, have called me and said, listen, like, I just don't have any friends. Like, I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative. I live in Portland. And I don't have friends now. And it looks like this group's guys kind of like me. And a lot of times those guys will also say, and I want to start dating again. Like, I've not focused on my body in years, and I'm ready to start dating. Like, I'm not going to be a matchmaker for them, but I can at least get them some of their old swagger back and help them feel good about their body, cause that's a big important factor when you're in the dating pool, right?
I mean, it is at first, and then you realize how silly all that is,
Well, it matters when you're in the thick of it,
Yeah, it does. You're right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy Slayden. Keep me updated on everything that you're doing, and I'm sure we'll have you back again another time. Thank you so much.
I'd love to. Thank you.
And thanks, guys, for watching. Bye.